Chapter 11. To Hear the Movements. It was after 9 p.m. on a Monday night. I pulled around the corner at 1st Street and West 4th Street and parked illegally, putting Gertie's emergency flashers on. I was too tired and upset to keep driving. I had just hung up with my mom, and now all I could think about was the conversation I'd had with my grandfather over the phone a few weeks earlier. Besides, my new friend Nicole was going to call any minute with directions on where to park in relation to her apartment complex. We had never met before, only exchanged a handful of emails after she'd gotten wind of my expedition. She offered me a place to stay once I'd reached Detroit. The phone startled me when it buzzed in my hand, the van still idling. "Hi, Kristen, it's Nicole. We're on our way from the gym. Where did you end up parking?" Before I could bring myself to utter a single word, I began to cry. This was my first phone conversation with Nicole, and I was so embarrassed that I first tried to hold in the sobs until that seemed to cause them to double in size and volume. "Hi," I said shakily. "Is everything okay?" Nicole asked. "I'm so sorry," I said, now through heaving breaths and heavy tears. "I just hung up with my mom, and I need to book a flight back to New York. It's my grandfather. He doesn't have much longer." We hadn't yet hung up when Nicole and her partner Chris reached the van. It started raining through the humid night sky. She had no sooner parked and flung her car door open, leaving it unclosed behind her, as she trotted up alongside the van. It had been a few days since I'd last showered. It was hot. The air conditioner in the van had stopped working, and I was doubly sweaty from anxiety and sadness. I didn't want to hug her hello, like I'd done with everyone else I'd met so far, because I didn't want her to see me crying or to catch my stink. But as I slid out of the van, nervous to even make soggy eye contact, she leaned in. We stood in the middle of the street and embraced warmly as our silhouettes cast out behind us, drawn forward by the headlights of her car, still running. "Chris," said Mom. "Chris, are you there? I've got Pop on the phone for you." She was calling from St. Mary's Hospital. I was surprised to hear they were at a hospital since Pop had been living at the Eddie Heritage House Nursing and Rehab Center, and that's usually where she'd call from if I ever chatted with Pop over the phone. The Eddie, as Mom referred to it, was just a few miles from the house he'd built for my grandmother and their 3 kids decades earlier in Troy, New York. He chose to move in a couple of years after his wife, my Gram, started living there. Before he moved into the nursing home with Gram, he would take a senior citizen's shuttle to and from their house to the nursing home, where he would spend all day by her side, 7 days a week. Gram had had a stroke nearly a decade earlier that, not long after, bound her to a wheelchair. Pop took care of her for a few years from their home with the assistance of a caregiver who would stop in once a day to check in on things. But as his body slowed down, it became more difficult for him to lift her to and from bed, carry her to the bath, and prepare meals. Stories of Graham's outgoing and adventuresome childhood, and strength and kindness as a mother, were never in short supply during family gatherings. Like the one about how, as a teen, she broke her leg after attempting to jump a barrel while ice skating across a homemade pond, or when, in her early 60s, she was diagnosed with colon cancer and, after the surgery that removed much of her large intestine, she was told she'd have to wear a colostomy bag outside of her body the rest of her life. Within a few months, she fully recovered and overcame her diagnosis, remaining cancer and colostomy bag-free for her remaining years. Age, and perhaps a diet of too much chocolate, although it is hard to believe she liked chocolate more than I do, eventually caught up with her. The last few years of her life had taken away much of her memory and her words. She rarely spoke at all to anyone. I often wondered if she even recognized Mom after a while. My mother visited Gram every single day she spent in the home. When Mom had called, I was sitting in the passenger seat of the van, parked in the U-shaped driveway of Good and Raw in Lakewood, Ohio. It was comfortably warm out that day, and I was about to dive into a small container of sunflower-based vegan tuna salad and a plate of raw nachos topped with hearty walnut-based taco meat and a creamy cashew-based cheese sauce. I could immediately tell by her tone and cracked words that things weren't good. Pop had been on a gradual decline for a few weeks now, but I suppose it's a thing that's in many ways impossible to prepare for. "Hey, Mom. Yep, I'm here," I said. "Oh, okay. Put him on." Pop was notoriously hard of hearing. His large-lobed Italian ears, decorated with gray and white bristly strands of hair of varying sizes, jutting out from the inside and dancing along the top outer part of his ears too, would make you think they were designed for catching sound waves no matter what. But over time, conversations turned into slowed-down shouting so that he could make out what anyone was saying. "Hey, Pop, how are you?" I spoke as loudly as I could without full-on yelling into the tiny mic on my phone. I was glad to be inside the van, self-conscious of speaking so loudly. "Chris? Chris, is that you?" he said in a slow, muffled way. "Yes, it's Chris. Hi, Pop," I said. "Oh, it's so good to hear your voice, Chris. Chris, how are you doing? Still traveling?" "I'm well, Pop. Yes, still driving around the country." "Oh, that's just wonderful, Chris. I'm so glad. Hey, listen," he said, and then he started to cry a little. I just wanted to tell you that I love you, and that I'm proud of you. I still love the way you were with Spirit. Graham and I loved going to your horse shows and watching you do those side steps and trail courses with that little pony of yours. You two were such a great team." "I miss the horses too, Pop," I said, now trying to hold back my own tears. "And," he paused for a moment, "I wanted to say goodbye, Chris." "Oh, Pop," and then I started to cry. "I know my time is coming, and I just want you to know I love you and I'm so proud of you. You're wonderful, and Graham and I are so proud of you." "Thank you, Pop. I love you too," I said. He began to sniffle a bit more, and then Mom came back on the phone. She was crying. "He's been calling everyone today to say goodbye," she said. Through his final days, my grandfather's mind was relatively sharp, but his body had been on the decline for several years. After Graham passed, about 1 year earlier, he started to go much quicker. They were such a handsome couple, my grandparents. I always loved this one black and white photo of them, now browned and worn around the edges. Pop looked sharp, beaming with confidence in his army uniform, one leg propped up on the front bumper of a black car. Graham was standing next to the car, by one of the front tires. She was leaning against it, facing the camera. Pop was just behind and alongside her. Graham's hair was done up in 1950s-style waves. She had a big floppy hat on and wore a beautiful but simple dress, pinched at the waist by a skinny belt, and saddle shoes. They looked happy. This photo lived frameless atop their fireplace mantel, along with dozens of other photos, some framed, others not, of Mom and her older brother and sister, and of me and my brother and our cousins. My mom and aunt in their childhood baton-twirling uniforms, my uncle in Boy Scout get-ups, their own children's aging family photos, baby pictures, and dozens of their grandkids' school portraits. In addition to the black and white one of them, there were 2 other photos, placed somewhat centered on the mantel, that always caught my eye whenever I'd scan the lineup. The first was that of my mom in her late teens, sitting atop a large chestnut-brown horse named Lady. Lady was mid-swishing her tail, her neck lowered to the side and scratching one of her forelegs. Mom looked ethereal. I'd rarely seen her as confident and happy as she appeared to be in that picture. She radiated contentedness and joy with her straight, waist-long brown hair pulled back into a loose, low ponytail. Her porcelain skin shone from her face like a beam of light, and her sharp cheekbones glowed pink, and her deep green-blue eyes sparkled like Emerald City. The other photo was of me with my pony Spirit. We had won some blue and red ribbons at a local horse show that day. They were strung along the nearest rein for the picture. I must have been 10 or so years old. My spindly beige jodhpur-clad legs barely made it halfway down Spirit's hay-bellied sides, and my dome-shaped black velvet helmet made me resemble a bobblehead, equestrian in nature. Sometimes I'd look at that photo and feel as though time and space collapsed, that Scotty would beam me from present day to sometime circa 1992. My grandparents' living room would fade away, and streaks of light would zoom past me until I was no longer viewing the picture, but experiencing it as my preteen self, there on Spirit, holding the pose, waiting for Graham to snap the shot. She'd say, Chris, get her ears up. Jan," that's my mom, "Jan, will you get Spirit's ears up for the photo? "Chris, smile, show your teeth, smile," she'd say, all while snapping away on her toy-looking camera, the thick strap of it slung around her neck. Graham always had on a flowery blouse with either a pair of cotton, straight-legged blue pants or a brown ankle-length skirt. She slept with curlers in almost every night, so her gray hair was perfectly curled into medium-sized swirls every day. "No, hold on, Chris. One more. Wait, let me get one more. Oh, shoot. Frank, how do I put the flash on?" she'd shout to my grandfather. Photo taking was always a bit of a process with Pop and Graham. I loved every minute of it. They never missed a single horse show, gymnastics showcase, school play, or dance recital. Not a single one. Their other grandkids lived in Virginia and Long Island. My brother and I were the closest to them, living in a small town just outside of Troy. They made it a point to show up and be supportive and positive, no matter what my brother and I were into at the moment. I suspect that if my cousins had lived closer, they would have found a way to see all of us as much as possible. I never did grow out of my love for horses. It would become a largely defining element of my childhood, and Pop and Graham were fixtures at every event. Even once wheelchair-bound, my grandmother would insist on getting up early so she and my grandfather could make it to the shows by 8 a.m., just in time for the first class. Friends and acquaintances and regular showgoers came to know my grandparents well. They had visitors at each show. No matter where along the ring they parked themselves, familiar faces would stop to chat, sometimes for hours at a time. Pop was the forever kind-hearted jokester, and Graham quietly carried a smile and a giggle that would warm your heart for days. Nicole pulled back and held me by the shoulders. Her cropped auburn hair cupped her head neatly. It stopped just below her ears, enough that she could just barely tuck it behind them. She was a bit taller than I am, slender and athletic-bodied. She had large, dark chocolate-brown eyes, deeper and more knowing than all the world's oceans. "I'm so sorry. We just met, and I feel terrible that I'm a mess, and I smell—" I trailed off as she stood looking upon me like a gentle, concerned mother, and then picked up after me. "Oh my gosh, no worries at all. It's okay. Everything will be okay." She pulled me in for another hug before we determined that Gertie would remain in the private parking lot of her apartment complex, a large DoubleTree hotel that was half hotel, half Fort Shelby Tower apartments. I'd never met anyone like Nicole. Though I was beginning to open to the idea of what spirituality meant, intention setting, meditation, and energy healing, Nicole lived it. She manifested dream jobs and relationships and living situations. She found meaningful lessons in every life event, and I saw, for one of the first times in my life, what inner beauty looked like on a complete stranger. Here she was, she and her kind, dashingly tall, dark, wavy-haired, handsome boyfriend, taking in a smelly, crying mess of a stranger who she met on the internet only a few months earlier. And yet, she felt like a dear friend, like someone I'd known my whole life. We clicked. Though I went to bed early that first night, after taking a long, much-needed shower, for my remaining days in Detroit, we'd stay up talking about food, family, travel, and romance. We watched ridiculous YouTube videos into the wee hours of the night. She introduced me to her friends, we dined in and out together, and I truly felt cared for, without a hint of judgment or question. One of my favorite meals was enjoyed at Nicole's living room table. We ordered nearly one of everything from Detroit Vegan Soul. Co-founders and owners Erica and Kirsten personally delivered our goodies, and Nicole's friend Kim joined us for the feast. The table overflowed with what, to this day, is the best soul food I've ever had the pleasure of enjoying. In tapas-style fashion, we passed compostable to-go containers around and across the table, scooping out hefty spoonfuls of the most tender collard greens and creamy mac and cheese. We sliced in half the 2 large slabs of seitan steak with mashed taters doused in a thick, dark brown home-style mushroom gravy sauce. They were crispy, fried spring rolls with sweet and sour dipping sauce, salty string beans, and mini corn muffins that crumbled delicately into our hands. We even cut an avocado-topped veggie burger, with the fluffiest of buns, into thirds. We finished the meal off with Detroit Vegan Soul's warm apple pie, oatmeal muffins, and chocolate chip cookies that were so good, a single bite was enough to paralyze me for more than a few seconds. Afterwards, the 3 of us reclined in a food coma, guts aching with delight, and gabbed the rest of the day away talking travel, relationships, marriage, and the universe. I could relive that meal and Nicole and Kim's company every day without tiring of it. The day of my flight, Nicole handed me a paper bag that she'd packed full of snacks, then drove me to the airport so I could go home for Pop's funeral. She also picked me up when I returned to Detroit a week later. I learned that, while I was away, her dad had taken the van for a tune-up and oil change, and replaced one of the non-working headlights. It's no wonder this sweet young woman was so kind and generous. Her family appeared to be equally so. On the morning of my last day in Detroit, having returned from the funeral now and finishing up vegan food spotting, I sat tired and uncomfortable on a bar stool at Cacao Tree Cafe, eating a huge salad of baby spinach with cucumber, avocado, red cabbage, onions, carrots, sprouts, and house-dehydrated teriyaki almonds topped with ginger lime dressing. I schlepped back to the van and discovered a parking ticket on Gertie's windshield. Apparently the meter was 5 minutes overdue. I left the parking ticket on the windshield, crawled into the van, rolled up into the blankets on the bed, and took a brief, deep nap. Afterwards, I plucked the parking ticket out from under the wiper, hopped into the driver's seat, filled out the ticket form and put cash inside the envelope before driving to the town police station to drop it off. As I settled back into the driver's seat and buckled my seatbelt, I opened the mail app on my phone for a quick scan before heading out and on to Wisconsin. There was an email with the subject line, "Dear Beautiful Woman." It read, "You are stunning in the most epic way possible. I am so grateful for you. Tap dancing to hear the movements, Nicole." This has been an excerpt from the book Will Travel for Vegan Food, One Woman's Solo Van-Dwelling Mission to Break Free, Find Food, and Make Love. Written and read by Kristen LaJeunesse. Recorded and produced by Crooked Creek Records, a vegan-owned and operated recording studio. This book is property of vegan publishers.